Socrates has become a symbol of martyrdom over the ages. He's been compared to Jesus and Galileo, and he served as inspiration for Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and other individuals who have clashed with their government but maintained their integrity. In other words, when you think of Socrates, you should think of civil disobedience. Now, we don't have any direct writings from Socrates. Socrates actually preferred not to write things down, and so everything we have is from his student, Plato. And there's lively debates among scholars about how much the Socrates that we see in the Apology, in the Crito, in the Gorgias, and other texts from Plato is really Socrates, and how much of that is just Plato using Socrates as a mouthpiece and making him say things that Socrates himself would never have said. Either way, in this piece, which is called the Apology, he's been accused of treason, and he has to defend himself. The Apology is about, at some level, who has the right to teach and educate future students. And ultimately, it's about the limits of political authority. The trial of Socrates is a real event. We have it confirmed from other sources. Whether it happens as Plato said it did, nobody knows, although we do have from other sources that Socrates was indeed convicted, and he was allowed to commit suicide while imprisoned by drinking the poison hemlock. We also know these events take place about 5 years after the end of the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens. Before the war, Athens was at the height of its power, led by Pericles. Sometimes it's called Periclean Athens. And Athens is this glorious city. It's powerful, it's well-respected, it's rich. But after it loses the war with Sparta, Spartans put a dictatorship in place called the Rule of the 30 Tyrants. Now, the Rule of the 30 Tyrants doesn't last very long. It lasts under a year. But it shakes the confidence of the Athenians. And so the time after the Rule of the 30 Tyrants is a time of conspiracies, self-doubt, and the restoration of democracy has been put into place, but Athens is no longer the power that it once was. At the time of the trial, Socrates is about 70 years old, and he's a war veteran. He fought in this Peloponnesian War. However, many friends and students of Socrates were implicated in the Rule of the 30 Tyrants. Plato himself, Socrates' students, had been invited to participate in the rule, and Socrates wasn't really a big fan of democracy. Indeed, Socrates often condemned democracy as being a kind of mob rule, so even though he was part of the dictatorship, he wasn't exactly friends with the people who were accusing him. And the charges that were brought against him were brought by resistance fighters, supporters of democracy, people who didn't like Socrates very much. In a sense, people think that Socrates is being accused of guilt by association. Right? His students, people who like Socrates, were involved in this government, in this dictatorship, even though Socrates wasn't. There's another more philosophical backdrop to the trial, however, and that's a quarrel that's been going on for quite some time in Athens between the philosophers on the one hand and the poets on the other hand. And the quarrel is about who gets to educate the children. Historically, Greeks had been educated by poets. All children were asked to study and memorize the Odyssey and the Iliad to examine the virtues of what made a man a great man. The Greeks believed that this education via these classics and the character that people got from this education is what made Athens great. Philosophers like Socrates, though, were skeptical of this form of classical education. For them, for one, the method of instruction was problematic. The poets were oracular. They told stories and received inspirations from the gods. Socrates, on the other hand, was more conversationalist. He proceeded by arguments. He constantly asked people questions and tried to get to the truth through reasons. He basically questioned the methods of teaching, the teaching methods of the poets. He thought the truth should be discovered by people on their own through conversation and argument rather than revealed by the classics and by the gods. In addition to the methods of education, Socrates also had a problem with the virtues, the values that the poets supported. These values that the poets supported were the values of the man of action, the warrior. Instead, Socrates wants to replace the virtues of the warrior with the virtues of the philosopher. Let not the stronger man win, but let the better argument win. The warrior epics of the Greeks praised the man of action, the man of faith as well. The philosophers instead praised the man of reason. Now, basically what Socrates was doing in Athens was running a kind of think tank or academy where fathers could bring their young boys to get an education. And this academy was what Meletus and Socrates' accusers were upset about. So what are the charges? The charges are impiety and corrupting the youth. But those charges reveal a deeper accusation. An accusation which isn't as much a legal accusation as a moral accusation. The accusation was that Socrates is irreverent towards the things that society cares the most about. Socrates has a lack of civic faith, you might call it. He doesn't respect the traditions of Athens. Or perhaps he lacks solidarity with his fellow Athenians. He's too different, too questioning, too skeptical. And because he doesn't believe in the things that other people believe in, he's deeply offending them. Now, of course, philosophy, inasmuch as it wants to replace opinion and faith with a reasoned account of why people should believe the things that they believe, is guilty. Philosophy is guilty and Socrates is guilty. He is, in fact, demonstrating a lack of civic faith or piety. But he tries to defend himself anyway. He's got a couple of things to say in his defense. He says, well, for those who accuse his motivation, Socrates says, look, I haven't personally enriched myself from my teachings, and so no one can say I did this for money or for bad motives. Moreover, he says, look, none of my students have complained, none of their parents have complained, none of them are standing here accusing me, and so you would expect that if I were teaching corrupting things or wrong things, that my students would be the first ones to complain, or at least their parents would, but none of them are. Moreover, he says, look, by questioning people, I'm definitely irritating them, but I'm also good for them, right? Even though I am being irreverent towards our traditions, or at least some of our traditions, by showing them that they're mistaken, or by showing them, in fact, that they're right, I'm giving people a deeper appreciation for these traditions, or I'm giving them an opportunity to correct their mistakes. Both of these things are good for Athens. So what he's essentially saying is, look, I'm a patriot, right? He also says, look, the laws on the subject really aren't that just anyway, and so the city shouldn't be condemning people just for the crime of offending them, even if those beliefs are beliefs that people care a lot about. Socrates ends up saying, look, it's better that I have integrity than that I obey unjust laws. Finally, he makes a religious argument against the charge of impiety. He says, look, how can I be impious? The gods are the ones who asked me to do what I'm doing, and so it's just not clear how these charges of impiety can stand. Okay, so those are the charges. That's Socrates' defense. The questions that you guys should be thinking about as you start thinking about questions to put on the discussion board and answers to questions on the discussion board. One, do you think people in societies should be allowed to offend each other? Challenge each other's sacred beliefs? Or are some beliefs so sacred, so important, that no one should be allowed to challenge them at all? And if so, if there are such beliefs, what do you think they are? Second question is, who should be allowed to educate the children in a country? Should the state be allowed to pass on its values and beliefs, or should people be free to send their kids to people like Socrates who question society's values?